All right, by our clock, it's 11 o'clock, so I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for tuning into today's Active Transportation Resource Center webinar entitled Safe Routes for Older Adults. I'm Victoria Custodio with the Active Transportation Resource Center. As our announcement for this webinar described, today's webinar will provide an overview of older adult mobility patterns and pedestrian and bicycle safety considerations for active aging, as well as resources for developing Safe Routes for Older Adult programs and lessons learned from a local Safe Routes for Older Adults pilot program. The Active Transportation Resource Center is holding this webinar as part of its regular webinar series, which features speakers and topics of interest and that benefit the Active Transportation Program, its awardees, and others who are also committed towards our shared goal of increasing active transportation and safety across all of our communities in California. This webinar has been organized in response to some requests for support and training to meet the needs and interests of older adults and our aging population. It also reflects a broader public health goal that active transportation and safety investments and programming be inclusive for all ages and abilities. Again, my name is Victoria Custodio, and on behalf of the HRC, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. For those of you who aren't familiar with the HRC, here's a little bit about what we do. We provide resources utilizing a combination of subject matter experts from Caltrans, the California Department of Public Health, California State University at Sacramento, and various other non-infrastructure, safe routes to school, and infrastructure experts. Our program exists to support Caltrans Active Transportation Program awardees who are infrastructure, non-infrastructure, and combination awardees at the local and regional levels. So some quick housekeeping before we start with the meat of our webinar. We are pleased to have the technology to record our webinar today. This will be posted, a recording of our webinar will be posted on the HRC website, which is http://caatpresources.org. Our phone lines will be on mute to eliminate background noise for our speakers and their presentations. And then lastly, questions and comments are encouraged. The only way to ask a question is through the dialogue or chat box. You can type in a question at any time. After each speaker, we're going to take one question, but we'll respond to the majority of the questions at the end of the presentation and take as many as we can in the time we have allotted. Okay. All right. And now into the meat of our training. What are we hoping that you'll get out of today's webinar? We hope this webinar will generate added enthusiasm and questions and dialogue, but concretely, because this is a training, we've created the following learning objectives for all participants. All right, and I realize we're getting some comments that I'm being very quiet. No? Okay, all right, I'll try to speak up. For the by the end of the webinar, participants should be able to describe recent trends in older adult mobility and pedestrian and bicycle safety needs. You should be able to identify 2 resources and strategies from SafeTREC'snew guide, Safe Routes for Older Adults, that you can apply in your own community. And then finally, you should be able to name 1 lesson learned from San Joaquin's case study on developing a Safe Routes for Older Adults program. We have a tremendous lineup of speakers today, and thank you them in advance for sharing their expertise. We'll begin with Patty Horsley, who is a health education consultant at the California Department of Public Health Older Adult Injury Prevention Program. She'll be presenting on pedestrian and bicycle safety among older adults. In addition to her work at CDPH, Patty is adjunct faculty of health education at Chico State University, where she teaches undergraduate public health courses. And many of you also remember Patty as the lead of the Safe Routes to School Technical Assistance Resource Center when it was first getting off the ground here at CDPH in 2009. After Patty, we'll have Tracy McMillan, who is a Senior Policy and Project Analyst at the University of California, Berkeley at SafeTREC. And I'm sorry I didn't spell that out before, but SafeTREC stands for Safe Transportation Research and Education Center. Tracy has worked in the area of active communities since the 1990s, conducting research and teaching in the areas of safe routes to school, park accessibility, neighborhood walkability, and transportation safety. She's the primary author for the Community Guide for Safe Routes for Older Adults, which she'll be sharing during her presentation today. And finally, we'll hear from Matthew Bogue. Matthew is a Health Education Associate at San Joaquin County Public Health Services. Matthew worked as a program manager for a local nonprofit organization prior to coming to the county, where he has focused on active transportation and healthy food access, and as they pertain to equitable community design. Matthew will share the Safe Routes for Older Adults work that San Joaquin has been doing, which gives us a model and lessons on how local jurisdictions can initiate and grow this work. Okay, so, and again, I'm Victoria. So before we go any further, we have two polls for our audience so that we can have a sense of who's on the call with us today. So the first one is about your familiarity with Safe Routes for Older Adults. I see you are completing the poll. Thank you for doing this. We'll give it a few more seconds. And we're seeing that it's changing. But it looks like if I'm getting it right, we've got about, is there a bar up here? It's like 40% or so of you are not currently involved with Safe Routes for School programming, and then about 20% of you are, and then we have some folks that are not contributing yet right now. So hopefully that will help our speakers to know a little bit about that aspect of our listeners today, participants today. And then, okay, so that, and then our second poll is to help us learn about which field of work you represent. So if you could also complete this poll for us, and this gives our speakers some understanding about who's in our virtual room. And the HRC's network is comprised of folks from all of these different fields, so hopefully we'll still have a nice representation of multi-sectoral partnerships. Okay. So seeing that the majority, about 30%, are in transportation. After that, we've got a number of folks working in public health, still increasing, and then a few, just a small handful of folks who are working in planning and aging, and but again, I think the bulk are coming from transportation and public health, but we do have a nice representation. So hopefully that helps our speakers. And with no further ado, I'm going to pass off the mic to our first speaker. Thank you, Patty.
Thank you, Victoria, and good morning, everyone. My name is Patty Horsley, and I'm with California Department of Public Health's Older Adult Injury Prevention Program, as Victoria mentioned. I'm just going to set the stage a little bit here and give some background on pedestrian and bicycle safety among older adults and share some of the current data and trends with you. So one reason we're really looking forward to talking with you about this topic today is that we know California's population of older adults is growing. In 2010, Californians aged 65 and older made up just 11.5% of our state's population, and that number is expected to grow to just over 20% in 2030 until it gets to be about a quarter of our population in 2050. Also notable is that the percentage of California's population over age 85 is also projected to grow quite a bit, from 1.6% in 2010 to just over 6% in 2050. And while the majority of trips taken by older adults are by automobile, walking is the next most common mode of transportation, comprising about 8.5% of all trips taken by those aged 65 and older, or 60 and older, I'm sorry. But whether they drive, walk, or bike, or use public transportation, we know that every trip begins and ends on foot. And this makes the safety of infrastructure like sidewalks of paramount concern for older adults. Even though most older adults probably will continue to prefer private vehicles, we know that active transportation is beneficial to their health. It can help older adults maintain independence and reduce social isolation, as well as provide meaningful health benefits such as improvements in cardiovascular disease and diabetes, as well as a reduction in falls and fewer difficulties with activities of daily living. Studies have also linked regular walking for physical activity to an increase in life expectancy for older adults. So while we can all agree it would be great to have all older adults walking more, physical changes common with advancing age can impact safety as a pedestrian or bicyclist. In fact, 43% of Californians age 60 and older live with a disability. Gait changes that can be common in older adults can result in slower walking speeds, so it takes longer to cross a street or an intersection, as well as things like reduced balance, stability, and foot lift, which can lead to falling. Other common impairments that can affect safety include visual, auditory, and cognitive impairments that can make it more difficult to navigate a traffic environment, particularly if it's one we're not super familiar with. And so those changes are part of why older Californians are at high risk for pedestrian and bicycle injuries. And to give you a sense of what we see in 1 year in California, so the most recent data we have for non-fatal injuries and emergency department visits is from 2014, and for deaths is 2016. So in just 1 year, almost 800 older adults, among pedestrians age 65 and older in California, in just 1 year, almost 800 were hospitalized with non-fatal injuries. Over 1,500 were treated in an emergency department for injuries and then released, and just over 300 died. There are fewer older bicyclists than pedestrians in California, but we still see pretty high injury numbers, with almost 600 older bicyclists hospitalized with non-fatal injuries, almost 2,000 treated for injuries in an emergency department and subsequently released, and 35 dying over the course of 1 year. And when we look at 10-year trends, so we are looking at here 2005 to 2014, with the red line representing pedestrian-related injuries and the blue line representing bicycle-related injuries, we see that a growing number of older Californians are being hospitalized as a result of non-fatal injuries, whether it's as a pedestrian or a bicyclist. So our numbers are growing. And we see a similar trend for emergency department treat and release visits, with larger increases being seen for bicycle-related injuries, which is the red line, than for pedestrian-related injuries. And then when we look deeper at these numbers, what we see is that the risk of injury and death increases with age. In fact, older adults are disproportionately represented in pedestrian injuries and fatalities, both in California as well as nationally, where fatalities among older pedestrians occur at 2 to 3 times the rate of the general population. And if you compare all age groups, Californians between the ages of 80 to 84 are the most likely to be hospitalized with a non-fatal pedestrian injury, followed by those aged 75 to 79. While bicycle-related injuries are more common in younger, older adults than those older, we might assume this is because the younger age group might be riding their bicycle more often. So what all this means is that the older one becomes, the more susceptible one can be to suffering severe injuries as a pedestrian or bicyclist that can lead to death. And in addition, transportation infrastructure, which Tracy is going to talk about more in her presentation, tends to be not designed as well for vulnerable pedestrians like older adults. So if we want more older adults walking and bicycling for the benefits that I discussed earlier, we need a built environment that encourages active transportation. Studies have shown that features of the built environment, such as overall walkability, safety from crime, easy access to destinations and services, availability of benches to rest on, access to park shops and commercial destinations, greenery, as well as access to public transportation, all make a difference in whether or not older adults will walk or bike for transportation. Finally, we know older adults want to age in place, but aging in place in a community that does not support active transportation can lead to social isolation and results in a myriad of health issues. When analyzing travel behavior of baby boomers, travel behavior analysts Nancy McGuckin and Jana Lynott from AARP noted that many baby boomers have lived their entire lives in the suburbs, born and raised there, raised their children there, and most likely will age in place there. The place where people live as they age is critical to the kind of support networks and mobility options available to them. And that's it for my presentation. I also wanted to give a shout out to my colleague Krista Anderson, who helps me with all of this data and putting these presentations together. So thank you, Krista, for that.
Thank you so much, Patty. That was a great kickoff to our webinar. We actually have one question that's come in, and I was wondering if we could take it now, which is how does the growth of injuries related, pedestrian bicycle injuries for older adults relate to the growth in the older adult population? And I think
what that question is about is rates. And I don't have slides with rates on it in this presentation. I can get you more accurate data, but to my recollection, the rate of, if we look at the rate of pedestrian injuries for older adults, that's actually going down slightly, whereas the rate of bicycle-related injuries for older adults is going up.
Okay.
I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that right now, and we can see if additional questions come in. Thank you so much, Patty. That was a tremendous presentation. We appreciate the kickoff. And now, Tracy, if you can unmute your phone, let us know that you're on. Perfect. All right.
Can everyone hear me?
We can.
All right, great. Hello, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of today's webinar. As Victoria mentioned, I'm presenting about the Safe Routes for Older Adults guide that SafeTREC recently published at UC Berkeley. My co-authors on the guide are Anna Lopez and Jill Cooper, who are also on the call today. And I'd also like to thank Patty and Carissa for their input on the guide. Next slide. As Patty presented, there's a lot of change underway in our national and statewide demographics. Largely due to the wave of baby boomers reaching older age and living longer in it, over the next few decades, we will double the population 65 and older at the national and state level. By 2050, over 25% of California's population will be 60 and over. Where will this growth occur? By these estimates, approximately 16% of the population 60 and over in the United States will live in California. And the growth in California will occur in our suburban, urban, and urbanizing areas. Next slide. Right now, older adults are predominantly vehicle drivers, as Patty discussed. The majority have their driver's license and use a vehicle as their most frequent mode of travel. However, walking is their second most frequent mode, and it's important for us to remember that no matter what other modes are used, virtually every trip begins and ends on foot or on wheels. Another important demographic for us to be aware of is household structure. While we're living longer, we're also more likely to be living alone, and this affects females more than males. To me, this really speaks to the intersection of health, housing, transport, and social services policy, and who can and should be at the table when building our stakeholder networks, which we discuss in the guide. Next slide. There are many societal trends underway, not to mention the shifts afoot in travel behavior, with mode options other than the single occupancy vehicle gaining in usage, such as walking, bike share, ride share, and automated vehicles, particularly in more urban areas. We have an opportunity before us to be ahead of these changes through design and programming that supports walking and bicycling for older adults and for everyone. We've done it before in California. Our state was at the forefront in the United States for addressing specific needs of youth with the creation and development of Safe Routes to School programs, materials, advocacy, and funding streams. I believe we can now do it again at the other end of the age spectrum to make safe routes for older adults and for all ages. Next slide. So Safe Routes to School really provides us a model for community action and change through the 6 E's. Building on this excellent work, our goal with the guide was to provide communities with background information on walking and bicycling safety for older adults and tools to make transportation in California communities age-friendly for all. Next slide. The first E's I'm going to talk about are equity and empowerment. These really should provide the foundation for your Safe Routes work. Equity speaks to the fact that all people, regardless of age, race, gender, ability, or income, have a right to healthy and livable communities. This is important when building your stakeholder network. Who is at the table, literally, as in this picture, and figuratively? Older adults need a presence to ensure that their experiences inform planning, program development, and policymaking. We need to focus on common goals to identify our obvious and not so obvious potential partners. For example, back in the day, transportation and health were strange bedfellows, back when I started in active communities in the mid to late 1990s. But both wanted to get more people moving by feet and wheels, and here we are today on the Active Transportation Resource Center webinar hosted by the California Department of Public Health and Caltrans. Finally, another critical component as you begin a truthful examination about where your community sits along the stages of change. Are they at the I don't know what you're talking about stage, or the we're ready to commit resources stage, or somewhere in between? This will help to guide your expectations and efforts. Remember, regardless of where your community sits, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Next slide. So evaluation is near and dear to my heart, and I hope that it is yours or it will become so. It's an important investment to make, both in terms of time and money, to help us identify what works and what doesn't, and the impact of that investment on many aspects of health, which can in turn help to justify future spending and investment within our communities. Within the guide, we provide examples of both quantitative data, like the Transportation Injury Mapping System, or TIMS, which is hosted here at SafeTREC, or qualitative data such as walk audits, and how it's important to plan for evaluation as a continual activity. Evaluation can help you identify problems and opportunities, such as during a community needs assessment, monitor progress and interim outcomes while projects are underway, and assess the impact of change at various time points after projects are complete. In regards to evaluation, I'd also like to note that it's important for you to not rely on one data source. Doing so typically leaves a part of the story out. Triangulating your data is ideal, which also allows you to see where data is in synergy with one another, or where you may see differences and have to investigate a little further. Next slide. No matter how ready our community may seem, there is often a need to educate or remind community members, policymakers, older adults, and even ourselves of the benefits of and safety strategies for walking and bicycling for older adults. We're all biased by the lenses we wear. This is a picture of my son with my parents on the left. For years, in working with Safe Routes to School, I had a deep academic understanding of the topic. However, my perspective broadened when I became a mom. And as my parents age, my perspective has broadened again. As I like to say now, I wear progressive lenses. As we discussed in the guide, there are many ways to provide this education, from infographics to walk and talks and signage in your community and more. Next slide. My mom, who you saw in the last picture, has diabetes and imbalance issues. As I move around with her, I see the challenges she has in certain environments and what infrastructure would be supportive. This information that Patty presented earlier is critical to keep top of mind as we think about engineering and how the built environment may help or hinder one's ability to walk or roll. Next slide. As we discussed in the guide, reducing conflict is one of two main issues that can be improved at intersections. As an example, you can see in this picture that there's a lot of potential for conflict. How much time is this person being given to cross the intersection? Is the timing and design such that she experiences real or perceived pressure? Next slide. This great graphic from Krista Anderson of ClassUrban.com highlights the challenges most of us face in trying to cross a signalized intersection in time. So the woman using the walker in the previous picture is likely crossing at a pace of about 0.8 meters per second, or 2.62 feet per second, which is almost half of the pace of an able-bodied adult, and is less than half the pace that is standard for signal timing. Next slide. The standard in the California Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or the MUTCD, at most signalized pedestrian crossings is 3.5 meters per second, 3.5 feet per second, sorry. However, recently the signal timing parameters were updated to account for slower walking speeds at locations where older or disabled pedestrians routinely use a crosswalk. That is a great step in the right direction, but as we have been talking about and with the age wave that we're expecting, and as we also think about designing for all abilities, perhaps the next step is for us to reevaluate what is standard. Since on any given day, at any given intersection, we're all the slower moving individuals in that previous graphic. Next slide. Another potential engineering solution to reduce conflict is to look at the phases of signal timing at intersections. Leading pedestrian intervals, or LPIs, reduce conflict by giving pedestrians a head start before vehicles are authorized to enter the intersection. Research has shown they are effective at reducing pedestrian vehicle conflicts, or pedestrian vehicle collisions and conflicts. They can also be a lower cost engineering change. It's just changing the signal timing. You're not adding additional signage, which is possible. There's lots of different variations as to how this would be implemented at an intersection. But it's certainly cheaper overall when compared to laying pavement. Next slide. The other improvement that can be made at intersections and other locations on the roadway is to increase the visibility of all road users to one another. This is an example of a pedestrian hybrid beacon, another Federal Highway Administration proven countermeasure. And as this example is found on San Pablo Avenue in Albany, California, outside a senior living property. Next slide. In addition to intersections, there are many other locations along the street environment where improvements can be made to increase the safety and appeal of walking and or bicycling for all travelers, including older adults. For example, we can improve the sidewalk condition, like reducing sidewalk uprooting, as is seen in the picture on the right, and we can also reduce obstructions on the sidewalk, as we see on the left. This also relates to our next slide, enforcement. Is there enforceability of municipal codes or ordinances, such as keeping sidewalks clear of obstructions? And or is there a reporting method that people feel comfortable using, such as a 311 phone number or a See, Click, Fix website or mobile app? Next slide. Enforcement can take many different forms to increase awareness and change behavior. Senior zone signs can be used near senior facilities. However, it's important for municipalities to note that enforcement is only possible if both the senior zone sign that's shown in this picture and a speed limit sign are posted together. Enforcement also circles back to evaluation, as we discussed earlier, where data such as census, vehicle speed, walk audits, and police-reported collision data can be used to pinpoint hotspots or problem areas where this signage may be warranted. Next slide. Finally, the Safe Routes for Older Adults Guide provides examples of encouragement activities that communities are using to promote safe walking and bicycling among older adults. One such program from our neighbors to the north is the Buddy Bench program out of the city of Edmonton in Canada. The Buddy Bench pilot project is part of the city's Hello, How Are You campaign, which encompasses two council initiatives, the Council Initiative on Urban Isolation and Mental Health and the Council Initiative on Seniors. The Buddy Bench is designed to promote social connectedness and reduce social isolation within the community. The program itself started at schools and is now being piloted at locations across the city of Edmonton. The benches are specifically painted to invite people to sit on them all year round. If someone notices a person sitting on a Buddy Bench, they are encouraged to sit with them and start up a conversation. The hope is that the benches will help turn strangers into neighbors. Last slide. In closing, as you begin or continue your Safe Routes for Older Adults work, we encourage you to celebrate your successes, big and small. I'd like to thank my co-authors, Anna and Jill, and everyone who helped with the guide, and they're noted in the acknowledgments section in the guide, which I hope that you will download. I'd also like to thank the California Active Transportation Resource Center for hosting the webinar, and the California Office of Traffic Safety for their support of the work being done in communities across California to promote safe and active transportation.
Great. Thank you so much, Tracy. That was a wonderful presentation, so rich in information, and we actually have some questions that have come in. Just as I mentioned earlier, we're going to give you one right now, and then we're going to save the rest for after Matthew's presentation. So this one came in early, so it's about autonomous vehicles and whether you can speak to the impact of autonomous vehicles on the mobility of older adults, if that's something that's considered in the guide or something that you have expertise in, Tracy.
We don't talk about that specifically in the guide, and I have not worked in that area yet, though it is an area that we are beginning to dive into at SafeTREC in different capacities, not only older adults, but other populations, other people at SafeTREC and at Berkeley are working in that area. And so it is definitely a topic of interest and investigation that we intend to become more involved in.
Very good. Thank you, Tracy. Want to thank Tracy again for her presentation, and at this point I'd like to make sure that we have enough time for Matthew. So Matthew, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
We can, okay. Thank you again, Tracy, and I'll turn it over to Matthew for our next presentation.
Hi, thank you guys for inviting me to come on and present. I'm always happy to be able to share what it is that we're doing out here in San Joaquin County. As was mentioned, my name is Matthew Bogue. I work here for San Joaquin County Public Health Services, and we've been doing a lot in trying to create walkable communities here in our county for our older adults, and we hope to just share some of that with you all. Go ahead, next slide. But first, I'll lay out a little bit of how we got to where we are now. I was hired onto a program called Lifetime of Wellness here in the county. It is a CDC-funded grant that came down to the state and then was subawarded to 6 counties in the state. It is about as comprehensive of a chronic disease promotion program as you're going to see. We only work with adults, but we work with the electronic health records. We work with local pharmacists. We work in establishing CDC diabetes prevention programs. And then we also work in your more typical areas of chronic disease prevention pertaining to the built environment. So I work with employers trying to adopt physical activity policies, work with food banks for nutritional guidance on their procurement and distribution, and I work with city planners and public works agencies working on the design of city and general plan and all those sorts of things. So it's very, very broad. We've been able to accomplish a lot over the last 3 years, and we're hoping that this kind of continues to ripple out into the future. But through this funding, I was connected with our Commission on Aging here in San Joaquin County. Our commissioners were initially interested in curb cuts because they were having issues getting up and down out of the street onto the sidewalk in certain areas of the county, particularly in the city of Stockton. And they weren't sure who they would contact about that or how they even go about organizing themselves to maybe they just needed to send a letter or something to that effect. And so when we were invited into that group, they broke out and created a walkability work group, and we tried to just kind of broaden their view a little bit as to how much power they actually had here and what they could actually accomplish with their voice. So this walkability subgroup was created, and we just asked them to kind of broaden their view a little bit. Go ahead and go to the next slide. A lot of this has been covered already today. The best part about being the last presenter is that I don't have to go exhaustive into these things because most of them have been said already, so this is review. But some quick senior mobility notes before we move on. 20% of our senior population, or of people aged 65 and over, don't drive at all. You could make arguments that that number should be higher, but 20% of them don't drive. Seniors are outliving their ability to drive safely by an average of 7 to 10 years. So that means we have people that are living longer and still have places to go, but are forced out of their vehicles. Seniors who no longer drive take 15% fewer trips to the doctors, almost 60% fewer trips to eat out, and 65% fewer trips to visit family and friends. 85% of our older Americans were extremely or very concerned about the rising cost of gas. A lot of our seniors, as you know, are on a fixed income, and rising gas prices can take even able-bodied drivers out of their cars. So now we're actually lowering the amount of people that are either even able to drive. We're taking them even further out because they can't afford it anymore. And we all know that regular physical activity can do great wonders for your body. It can decrease risks for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, asthma, different types of cancer, fall prevention, things of that nature. And it increases longevity, muscle growth, muscle strength, mood, circulation, balance, and the list goes on. But as we learned earlier, this is going to be a problem for a while. Our seniors want to age in place and not go to a home. The last baby boomer turns 65 in in year 2030, which is supposed to be, as we learned earlier, double the population that it is now. By 2050, we learned earlier, that's going to account for 25% of our nation's population. We have communities, or we need to have communities that accommodate their needs earlier than that, but also continue far past that. And we know we can operate by the mantra that Safe Routes to School has used going before us, where they said that if a community is walkable and safe for children, then it's going to be safe for all. And we can say the same thing here. If a community is going to be walkable and safe for our older adults, then it's going to be safe and walkable for everybody. Go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so getting to the nitty-gritty of what we do here in San Joaquin County, we have 3 main goals in our work here. It's to educate, empower, and advise. We'll get into these a little bit more in the upcoming slides. And also, just so that you guys are aware, I really wanted advise to be an E word, just because I love alliteration, but I couldn't make it work. So if you have suggestions, go ahead and feel free to send them to me. But through our education, we do these through formal trainings and gatherings, facilitated discussion times. When we're trying to empower, we're actually trying to enable involvement in the ongoing work. We're trying to enable the communities that we work with to go get involved on their own, to not necessarily need us anymore. and advise is our work and the work of those that we've empowered to make continual recommendations and provide technical assistance in whatever way they can. Go ahead to the next slide. So educate. One of the main ways that we've done this in the past is to host symposiums. They're about half days. We've done 2 in the past, and we're working on a 3rd right now. Our symposiums have featured California Walks as our main speakers. They've been fantastic for us. They've really allowed us great opportunity to dive in and utilize the breadth and the depth of knowledge that they have. We've had some keynote speakers. Betsy L. Thompson came to the first one. She was the acting regional health administrator for the Office of Health Assistant Secretary for Health Region 9. She has a very long title. But we've done this through the keynote speakers specifically coming in talking about things, California Walks talking about things in their educational sessions, and we've had panel discussions with our local planners to tell us what are the things that are going on and how can we be involved. But probably the most beneficial time in these symposiums is devoted to our breakout activities, where we break people out geographically and we talk about the needs and the possible solutions and the things that are going on that we know of. So these symposiums have people that range from electives to your everyday citizen to your community-based organization that works with older adults. Safe Routes to School is definitely a partner in this as well. And so we have a really good cross-section of people attending that can give their input, their view on the issue, and then help us come to solutions that are going to benefit everybody, but with a very particular senior focus. At the end of it, California Walks is fantastic in making up a report that summarizes the day, summarizes the tasks that we've set for ourselves going forward, and then we distribute that report out to everybody so everyone is available to access it. We facilitate some follow-up calls by region in the breakout groups so that we can kind of check in throughout the year to see if people are continuing the work that they said that they were going to do, talk about the wins, talk about some of the challenges that they're encountering and how we might be able to help. And we do some ongoing presentations as well. We are regularly invited to community groups to give talks about what it is that we do, how people can be involved, and then send them out, kind of commission them to go be involved in the work. But one of the things that we do often, and is one of the most helpful things, is walking audits. Walking audit, I'm sure everyone on the phone is aware, but just as a quick overview, is that we go out and we survey an area, particularly an area where people feel as though it's very dangerous or not conducive to them being to them getting out and walking or riding their bike or being active in any way. And we go out with that group and we look for things that could be improved upon. We point out dangers. We point out the good things too to show that this is actually a really good thing that they've set up here. We'd like to see this more often. And then we kind of summarize those things, and then we hand it back to the group that invited us, and it's something that they can use to take to their city planners, their public works, their electeds, and say, hey, we've done some homework here. We think that there can be improvements X, Y, and Z, and we'd really like to see them affected. How can we get this done? And so we're going to do that real quickly here. We've done this rain or shine, and usually in the raining time, we do it virtually, so that's what we'll do here. We'll go on to the next slide. So what we're going to do here is just take 10, 15 seconds. I won't say that you have to put it into the chat box, but take a look at this picture and just tell me what's wrong. Tell me what might be good, but tell me what's bad. Think to yourself how this could be improved, why it might not be that walkable, and what you'd like to see enhanced upon it. Just for some background while you're thinking, this is a residential area in the city of Stockton. It is, I believe the neighborhood was built in the 1940s and 50s, and so the houses kind of sprung up real sporadically. It wasn't a whole development all at one time. Okay, go ahead on to the next. So this is just, in full disclosure, this is my house, my street, that's my truck. So I know the street very well, and so I may be able to point out things that you might not have seen, but you, I'm sure, were able to notice things that I haven't put in the slide either. But some quick ways that could be improved upon is that that bottom arrow pointing to the left is actually pointing at the rolling curb. Those rolling curbs while they make it easy for vehicles to get in and out. They widen the street a little bit on these narrow streets because vehicles can park up on the curb like I did my truck there. It's actually quite dangerous for a walker because you never know when a vehicle is going to be up on the curb. I hadn't noticed how difficult it was to navigate the sidewalk until my wife and I had a baby, and I'm trying to push a stroller down my own street, and I have to either go out into the street or up onto people's lawns in order to get around cars. The arrow pointing down, you can see that there's cracks in the sidewalk. About 2 houses further up, there's some very significant cracks with about 1.5 inch lift. So the sidewalk's buckling, making it difficult for even an able-bodied worker to go through there without tripping. That green section I've put in there is actually supposed to represent grass. A lot of the older neighborhoods in my city have grass that separates the sidewalk from the street, which gives a pedestrian even more confidence walking, knowing that they're going to be separated from the vehicles. And then there in the back right, you can kind of see a lamp post that I tried to draw. That is, there's no, I technically live in a county pocket of my city, and there is no street light on my entire street. So once it's dark, it's dark. There's no, like, if you're walking out there, there's uneven ground, you're probably going to trip unless you know where the crack is. There are other things that could be done here too. There's no road signage. A lot of these children are usually out and about playing, and you can't, there's nothing denoting that either. So there can surely be more, and I'm sure that you were able to see some that I didn't. We'll go for time. We'll just move on to the next one real quick. If you could forward the slide. Okay, and so this one's a little bit of a different context. Take 10 to 15 seconds to try to think about ways that this could be improved. For context, this is a picture of about 2 blocks north of downtown Stockton. This picture was taken at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's entering in that rush hour phase. Yet you see that there are no cars on the road, yet it's 4 lanes across. And so go ahead and go to the next one. Some quick little improvements. The green here now represents bike lanes. So we could easily take out those 2 far lanes on either side, throw in some bike striping. If we wanted, we could put a turn lane in the middle as a 3rd lane, which would allow cars to turn left and right without holding up the traffic behind them. There is a crosswalk in the left picture. You just can't see it. That's how poorly visible it is. So one thing that we could do easily is put in a real high visibility crosswalk, put up some signs that alert drivers as to where it is. We could put some bulb outs in to make the passing distance a little bit shorter. Those are some quick things that could be done, but obviously this road does not need to be 4 lanes across because there's no cars on it, even during peak hours, or very few. So we can make this smaller, throw bike lanes on it, and make it a real complete street. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so now that we're done educating people, we move on to empowerment, and a lot of these fold in together. But once educated, we can direct those that we're working with to their local officials, whether it be their public works, city planners, whoever it is that's involved in the changes that get made. A lot of the work gets done through the ATP proposals. A lot of cities have caught on to that, but that's a great way to get funding, and with SB 1, there's only going to be more available. So we can direct our constituents to their local authorities to give them great ideas as to what they'd like to see done through ATP monies. We know that for ATP, for general plans, for master plans in general, the cities need community input. It's a part of the application process generally that there needs to be something that the community shows that this is an interest and this is going to help. So when we're asking you to take the information that you've gained from your walk audit or the things that you've noticed and go to your electeds and go to your planners, these are things that they actually want because it's going to inform their proposals. So here in our context, we've encouraged people to be involved in the ongoing Stockton General Plan. We have a draft coming out here pretty soon, which we provided a pretty exhaustive letter for, talking about what we'd like to see in it. Manteca is going through their general planning, and Lathrop is actually going to be going through it here in the near future. They haven't had a plan done since they became incorporated in 1989, so they are more than past due for it. Another thing is working with your RTP, SCS. It's up there. It's Sustainable Community Strategy. your planning organization is going to be doing that. More than likely they're doing it right now. But this is something, again, where you can be involved, and we've encouraged those that we work with to be involved, and we've been happy to see most of them at the meetings, voicing their opinions, talking about ways that they think that their area of the county could be improved and changes that they'd like to see in the plan itself. As was mentioned by Tracy earlier, a lot of seniors, or maybe perhaps it was Patty, I think it was Patty touched on it, that seniors aren't going to be the ones that are biking the most, but it is something that promotes walkability in general, so we like to have great opportunity whenever there's a bicycle master plan going on to make sure that those that we're working with are informed of how they can be involved in that process as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And then finally, we get on to the advise phase. For us specifically as the County Public Health, we continue advice for all ongoing efforts. We helped with, we have a tax here in San Joaquin County that we imposed upon ourselves. It's a gas tax called Measure K. It's really similar to the ATP and SB1. We actually use the ATP guidelines as our rubric for how the proposals would be scored. But we were able to give out $20 million to all of our to our cities across the county for Safe Routes to School, smart growth, active transportation projects that are shovel ready. So we'll be able to see these things happening real soon, which is great. And I myself was able to assist with over 20 of the 40 applications received. So we were really excited to be able to work so closely. But we also work continually with our senior walkability groups, the work group that the Commission on Aging has set up. One of their priorities is senior safe zones. It's something that Tracy talked about, is that a lot of people don't know that there is a 25-mile-an-hour prima facie, if I'm pronouncing that right, prima facie speed limit in senior zones. But again, it's impossible to enforce that without the signage. So trying to designate and denote those across the city so that the signage can be put up, and then our seniors can have a little bit more safety when they're out and walking about the places that they just congregate regularly. Again, our walkability work group is looking into ATP projects for their cities to look into, and we're always looking for future funding opportunity. We've recently received some future funding, or some funding from Sutter to do some fall prevention classes with our seniors, and that's been underway now for the last couple of months. We were able to direct some of our local cities, Lodi and Tracy, to apply for Walk with Ease program funding. I believe that Tracy did not apply and Lodi did, and Lodi received full funding for it to be able to implement the program itself, but also to be able to send 2 of their employees to a fully funded training to be able to do that for their city. Go on to the next slide. And some other ways that, some other activities that are going on in San Joaquin County and ways that we can be involved in the walkability efforts in general is the City of Stockton, as I mentioned earlier, is undergoing their general plan update, Manteca as well. City of Stockton has also received a planning grant for transformative climate communities. This is something that's heavily going to incorporate walkability in our most underserved areas, so it's got a real heavy equity lens. But it's not simply that, it's mostly it's talking about the environment and the climate, but we all know that these things weave in together, so there's definitely some areas that we're going to be able to work in moving forward out of that. We've worked closely with our RTP SCS, with our COG. Safe Routes to School is a partner that we work with real close, and that helps us provide some sustainability to the work that we've been doing, because Safe Routes to School is going to keep going even as our funding comes to an end. Refresh San Joaquin is actually a program that we've started here in San Joaquin County, and it's a corner store conversion program and recognition where we work with local corner stores in the areas that are designated as food deserts to try to get them to offer fresh fruits and vegetables as kind of the end game so that those that live in their communities that don't have access to them will be able to have better access to them at an affordable price. But it also reduces blight. It takes down tobacco advertisement and signage, and it makes the community more walkable because you enjoy walking in it more. So that's also a way that is going to be sustained, because that is housed within a braided funding effort here in the county. So even once my funding goes away, we'll be able to keep doing that work and promote that in the areas that need it the most. And we're always interested in learning. We've been invited to come to many trainings. We're always interested in learning the ways that other counties are doing similar things. We know that we don't have everything to offer everyone, and we'd always love to hear about other ways that people are doing these things as well so that we can better our offerings here. Go on to the next slide. Yeah, okay. And that's just my contact information. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions or encouragements, or if you think that you have a best practice that would really help us. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Matthew. That was excellent. I just wanted to give you also the feedback that during your presentation we're getting a lot of participation from our participants on just responding to the picture. So it was very interactive, and we definitely appreciate that.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So we're going to start our question and answer session next, but I did want to do the first one for Matt, and this came in a little bit earlier. You talked about a little bit about funding, but we had a question about getting started. And specifically, the question is, any advice on how to get started program for someone who's worked on many Safe Routes to School projects, but is interested in expanding to older adults? So you touched on this, but maybe you can just kind of summarize again how you've done this work in San Joaquin.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the way that it kind of happened upon us is that we were linked with our Commission on Aging, which is housed within our Community Services and Commodities program with our Human Services Agency. So it's a different part of the county that actually hosts the Commission on Aging. So I would suggest that you would start by looking maybe there within your HSA, see who it is in your county that deals with the older adult population. But as it gets to cities, I would actually do your best to link into the community-based organizations that are kind of probably already doing this work to begin with. They're probably working with seniors in different ways. I know one of our community-based organizations here in this county works with seniors for legal things when they have documentation that needs to be taken care of, and that's an easy way as well to tap into that population, to talk to them about these things, because these are things that are surely on their mind, but maybe they just don't exactly know how they would voice it or vocalize it. So that's an easy way to kind of get in with those folks, is through the community-based sector. Very good. Excellent. Thank you so much. Hopefully that answers that particular question. I have a question here for Tracy. Matthew mentioned tapping into California Walks, which is a statewide walk advocacy organization. It's one of our favorite partners in active transportation work, and they've done a lot of speaking. We know that they also work closely with SafeTREC. Can you speak to some of the resources, in addition to the toolkit that you shared today, that SafeTREC has to support active transportation and pedestrian bicycle safety, and specifically how that could work for supporting Safe Routes for Older Adult programs and initiatives?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So we do have a partnership with California Walks and also one with Safe Routes to School that we do through grant funding from the California Office of Traffic Safety, where we go out to communities and we do pedestrian and bicycle safety training workshops. They're about 3 to 4 hour workshops within communities, and we can target them based on a population focus at the community's request, whether they would like to take a Safe Routes to School focus, or we've done several that have a Safe Routes for Older Adults focus as well, or a general population, or another underserved population focus. And those workshops are available to any municipality within California to apply, and if you're interested, you can contact me for more information, and we'd be happy to come out and do those workshops for you. We also, we have another program that we do with California Walks that focuses on a few particular cities in California because of the disproportionate rate of pedestrian and bicycle injuries in the population as a whole. And we provide some additional technical assistance to them and those cities are Santa Ana, Fresno, Bakersfield, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Diego. So if you're from any of those cities, you can also contact us and we can go over the technical assistance that we provide that can be older adult specific as well.
Very good. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you.
We have some more questions coming in, and I also want to give Patty Horsley the opportunity to respond back to that initial question about, I wrote it down as rates.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that first question that came in about the rates of pedestrian and bicycle injuries, which I did not share graphs on, but I wanted to clarify that I found some data quickly on hospitalizations and emergency department treat and release visits. So this is from Epicenter, which is the online injury database out of the California Department of Public Health. And the information that I provided in my answer was related to hospitalization. So the rate of hospitalizations due to non-fatal pedestrian-related injuries has been declining for older Californians, and the rate for bicycle-related injuries has been growing. However, when we look at emergency department treat and release visits, so these are older adults who are injured as a pedestrian or bicyclist who go to the emergency department, are treated, and then released either back home or to somewhere else. What we're seeing that for both pedestrians and bicyclists, the rates are growing, but the rate is we have larger increases for bicycle-related injuries. So bicycles are a problem.
Okay.
Right. I can email this information.
Yeah.
Provide this information also.
Yeah, and we can provide this information to the person that asked a specific question, so that that it's a little more clear in writing. Okay, so thank you for that, Patty. That's always amazing to me that you're able to draw upon that. And I just want to remind everyone that we do have the Epicenter database. There's a query tool, and what we can do as part of our follow-up to this webinar is send out, in addition to the contact information for all the speakers, some links. We'll be giving you a link to the guide that Tracy shared with us. Matthew's also shared some additional resources from the San Joaquin program that we can put out to you, and then we can actually share some the data sources so that you can do your own queries, which we would be really pleased to see utilized locally. Okay,
Victoria,
so,
this is Tracy. If I could also say that hospital, the Epicenter data paired, which has the hospital data paired with the data that can be found in TIMS, which is the SWITR's data with the police recorded crash or collision data, which will capture some aspect of injury and fatality as well, is a really nice combination, particularly to, again, see where you may be missing part of the story. You may know where collisions are occurring within your community, but not all collisions are reported. And so combining that data that you find in TIMS with the hospitalization data is a really rich combination.
Very good. Yes, and we can also send out that link to the TIMS, SafeTREC'snew TIMS mapping system, which has been a tremendous resource for the active transportation program in understanding the actual locations of collisions, injuries, and fatalities. We are getting some comments that the audio is not working. We are going to move forward. We're checking on it, but please be patient. And we're just going to keep on moving on with the questions. We have here a question about that's for Matthew, and it's looking at from the start of from when you started to now, how much of the improvements identified by your program have actually been implemented, and what are the barriers that you encountered, and how are they overcome?
Yeah. So So we've started this work specifically probably in the last 2.5 years. So that's a relatively short amount of time, especially in the infrastructure world. So there has been little really realized very tangibly in that amount of time. However, there has been a lot of funding awarded, but we all know that awarded funding typically has a delay of 3 to 4 years before the shovels even hit the ground. One of the reasons I was most excited about the Measure K information, or the Measure K funding, was because part of the project's scoring rubric was whether or not they were shovel ready, because that funding, that $20 million, is going to be dealt out across the county, and you'll probably see that actually implemented in the next year or so, which is amazingly fast when you talk about this kind of stuff. So there's actually been I would say very little realized at this point, but when that's talking about infrastructure work. When it comes to doing these walk audits and laying that educational groundwork, we've done quite a bit. And it's amazing to see people come back year after year and be able to articulate what it is that they'd like to see in a way that a planner or a public works professional is actually going to understand it and be able to then utilize that for their own proposals. I wasn't sure if there was a second part to that or if it was just the infrastructure realization piece.
I think you answered that question really well, Matthew, and just highlighting again, all aspects of the work. I think it's easy to kind of fixate on the infrastructure builds, which we know take a lot of time. There are a lot of requirements to satisfy, and there's some patience that needs to happen with those builds, but I really appreciate you highlighting all of the work that you've been able to accomplish through the kind of the non-infrastructure and community building aspects. I appreciate that tremendously here from our perspective at this state. And we hope to, that actually is a lesson that will resonate with others in the field that are looking to do this work. I have, a lot of questions coming in and a lot of requests for a good deal of information that we're talking about through this Q&A. So our team here will do our best to kind of capture all of these questions and share them out with you as they come in. We're enthused that there's so much excitement for these presentations. Tracy, I had some questions for you. Many of us who work in active transportation are aware of Vision Zero initiatives that are happening. I know that you have case studies within the older adults, Safe Routes for Older Adults guide. Have you seen an overlap between Safe Routes for older adults and Vision Zero initiatives?
Just to clarify, what we intend to do with the Safe Routes for Older Adults guide is now create some case studies that will be a complement to the general guide. So, there are some communities that are very active have active Vision Zero initiatives within their communities, such as the City of Los Angeles and the City of San Francisco, that have also are doing or beginning to do outreach to the older adult communities. For example, I know that the City of Los Angeles, we've been in conversation and provided some workshops and technical assistance to the Vision Zero group down there, as well as the Housing and Community Investment Group within the City of Los Angeles around community pedestrian and bicycle safety, with some focus on older adults. And then the City of LA Vision Zero group is in the process of developing their own Safe Routes for Older Adults guide, and they are in conversation or collaboration with LA Walks on that as well. So that'll be a really interesting collaboration to come about and to see what develops there, and they're all doing really good things and are working together, which is really fantastic. So I think that's a good example for us to keep our eyes on.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Matthew, can we extend that question to you too? Do you I'm not aware if San Joaquin or cities within it have Vision Zero efforts, but is that a connect up that you are thinking about from the local lens?
Yeah, we would love, that's something that's kind of been on our wish list for a while. It's kind of one of those things that we've put off just a little bit just until we've been able to build that groundwork with our community members to know what it is, what the actual point of it is. We also had we'd be looking at it most specifically for the city of Stockton if we could get it done, but we've had a change in leadership in the last couple of years. We've elected a new mayor, and he has his own priorities, so we're kind of looking at it not in the sense of whether or not we would appreciate it, but just more in the sense of what is the best timing to actually get it done so that we don't have to try to do it over and over again.
That's great. Yeah, the timing is essential, so thanks for that, input, Matthew. Okay, we have some questions just about some of the graphics from Tracy's presentation earlier. So that one with the crosswalk, I don't know if Jane, if you're able to bring it back up, but the crosswalk with the crossing times, there was just some interest in that that resource and where that information might have come from.
Is this the graphic?
It's available through the guide as well. I think that's
yes, interestingly enough, I saw this graphic come across on Twitter one day, and I reached out to Krista Anderson with Class Urban, who is the source of the graphic. She has published this in a resource in, I'm blanking on the name off the top of my head, but it's essentially a professional practice journal in Canada for planners, and I can share that exact resource with you, as well as I encourage you to reach out to Kristen. She's a great resource, and older adults is one of her areas of focus. So she allowed us permission to reprint this graphic in the guide, so it is part of the guide, as well as this discussion about the California MUTCD as well, and the references to that change that occurred.
It's great. It's a great graphic, and that's a great suggestion. Maybe we can get some follow-up information from you, Tracy, about that for those that might be interested in using that as a communication piece within their local jurisdiction. Really helps to have good graphics. Okay, so we have a question about for Matthew that is about protected bike lanes versus conventional bike lanes, and whether or not your program, your Safe Routes for Older Adults program, is considering protected bike lanes rather than conventional bike lanes. Is that part of the discussions that you're having?
I mean, it's part of the discussions insofar as it pertains to safer, more walkable communities, because we know that if there's a protected bike lane, it's actually going to double down and protect the walkers that are even further, hopefully up on the sidewalk, because you're protecting the bikers and they're going to be in between. Usually there's even more of a barrier. So it's a good thing that we enjoy, and we would promote it as long as it's possible and conducive to the environment that it's in. But at the same time, I think that in our context, we recently, the city of Stockton, just adopted its updated bicycle master plan, and it has a lot of really, really good stuff. A lot of it being creating a bicycle network that allows you to get everywhere in the city, or even to cities that connect through the bike avenues. And so a lot of that has to do with eliminating lanes, adding in bike lanes. Some of those roads, it's going to be better to have a protected bike lane because they're a little bit more high speed, so bikers of all types would feel comfortable. But there are other roads where, particularly in the downtown area, similar to the picture that I showed, I don't know that it would necessarily need to be separated, just because if you make them real visible, if you paint them green or whatever it may be, I think even your most maybe not most, but one of your more remedial bike riders is going to feel safe and comfortable there, and it's going to promote the walkability of the person on the sidewalk because they're going to feel even more safe and comfortable knowing that there's that big buffer.
All right, Matthew, thank you for taking on that question. We appreciate it. All right, we have a question for Tracy, and it's asking, do you know of any successful examples of from local jurisdictions where they've been able, or where they've, the local jurisdictions have actually paid for senior zone signs and signage to identify senior zones?
Let me say, I see them posted, and to give some other background on senior zone signage and funding for them. This is actually a question I got clarification on from Tony Dang with California Walks recently. And the Office of Traffic Safety will allow grantees to purchase the signs with OTS funds, but OTS funds cannot be used for the installation of signs. However, ATP funds can be used for the erection of signage, for the installation of the signage, as well as private funds. And all of that is specified in the vehicle code. And then you can also get more detail in the California, the MUTCD, and I can also provide that information that Tony provided to me recently in a follow-up email that can go out to participants.
Thank you, Tracy. That was a very technical question, and I'm so glad that you had some background and were able to answer that. We might need you here as a resource center. But I guess you also want to thank Tony for that response
yes,
too.
Yes, thank you, Tony.
Yes, very good. I am seeing that the questions are slowing down from the chat box. And so on that note, I'm going to say we are going to move forward with the closing of our webinar.
Before we do that, would I be able to add something to Tracy's answer, just real quick?
Oh, yes, please.
So we've had the same conversations with Tony, so I'm happy that she was able to articulate that because I would have forgotten those funding streams and who does what. But one thing I will say, not to be a Debbie Downer on the situation, but as we've tried to do that and convey that to our planners here in our county, one thing that they have mentioned, which would be a barrier still, even though you can get it for free, you can get it installed for free, essentially, as long as you get awarded the fundings, that they have mentioned that the maintenance cost may be something that puts it over because they have to now maintain all of these new signs, make sure that they have staff going out to check them regularly, things like that. And so that might be just something that I don't know how, because we haven't solved that puzzle either, but I don't know how you would have something ready for your planners to go to them and say that, like, hey, this is a way that we think we could solve this as well to make it more reasonable to them. But that is pushback that we've gotten, is that they'd be, even if all of those things were true, they'd be reluctant to do it because they have to staff the maintenance of it.
Okay. That is a great point, Matthew, and an answer that people should be aware of, and the pushback they may get, and and hopefully people can think about a constructive reply to that, because there are lots of signs out in the community that we have to maintain that are directed for other purposes as well.
Right.
Trying to be diplomatic.
Yes, I think that these are important questions. They're good for us to acknowledge, and we can use that as a starting point, or a point for continued dialogue. And we do appreciate both of you bringing these concerns that you're hearing from local jurisdictions, or from your own jurisdiction in the case of Matthew's in San Joaquin, so that this is something that we're aware of at the state. And, you know, this is all about partnership and problem solving from a collective perspective, and resources are tight, so, but it's worthy of a conversation and a dispassionate conversation, and we, you know, at the Resource Center are always looking to kind of work through those solutions. But I definitely appreciate the you know, the breadth of your understanding of how, you know, this can work and what are the barriers. So we're going to stick to time because we know everyone's time is precious here, so we've got about 10 more minutes. And I am going to wrap this up. Wanted to first off just say thank you again to our wonderful presenters. Part of the system that we have here for our webinar series is to gather your feedback on what was discussed today. So in follow-up to this webinar, you'll be receiving a survey link. We really ask that you give us your feedback as to what you liked and didn't like about these the presentations, and if we met our objectives for as we shared earlier. And on the next slide, wanted to make some announcements. And so we had a question about funding, and some of our speakers brought up the Active Transportation Program. This is a great time to let you guys know that there is a significant call for funding that's going to be, it's just right around the corner. The 2019 Active Transportation Program, or those of us been working it for a while know it as Cycle 4. There's going to be an upcoming call for projects. Current guidance is available now, and I believe that there will be a meeting where the California Transportation Commission will actually approve the guidance, but you can look at the draft guidance now. It's on the California Transportation Commission's ATP webpage. You can also look at draft application materials, which are on the CTC page, but the electronic version of the application will be available on the Caltrans Active Transportation site, which is given there. Finally, we're going to be giving a lot of different updates about trainings and opportunities on our website, which is, again, caatpresources.org. For those of you that aren't aware, the California Department of Public Health's Active Transportation Resource Center staff is available for non-infrastructure program consultation. And so we have a general email, atsp@cdph.ca.gov, and so please use that as a place for your questions. Next slide. I mentioned that there are some trainings coming up. So Caltrans will be hosting on Monday, May 21st, an official call for projects workshop, and they will also be reviewing some of the technical aspects of the application. For those of you who are familiar with the ATP program, it is quite a technical application with a lot of different attachments that are used for the completeness of your application. So that'll be available, and you can get a link to that, to the workshop webinar through the HRC website. And then the next slide. And then this is a push from our end. We have right now an Active Transportation Resource Center needs assessment, and we are hoping to have input from around the state, from all of the stakeholders that are involved with active transportation, so that we can determine what your needs are, so that we as a resource center can start to address them in a systematic way. So we ask, if you have not looked at the survey or completed it, that you do so, and we are asking that one representative from each organization do that. So this has gone out through a number of different listservs already, but if you're, you know, if you're finding yourself in communication with the director of your agency, and you might want to ask them about if they've received this needs assessment, and if not, if your agency can submit a response, we would really appreciate it. Okay. So another thank you for our wonderful speakers, Patty, Tracy, and Matthew. This is a great webinar. We really appreciate your expertise. Here's their email addresses. I think they've all said that you're able to reach out to them with additional questions. And that's what we have for you today. So thank you again from the Active Transportation Resource Center. We appreciate your participation today, and please complete that survey and some of those other needs assessments and tools that we've listed. All right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.